We have a You're ready to go here. Tim, I'm sorry, we're walking into your time. We have Tim Hansel, who's connected to Pheasant Branch, right? Pheasant Branch area, which if you don't know in Middleton where that is, you should. Or if you're way up north, you won't. But in any case, it is probably one of the premier birding spots in Madison area. Of course, that's hard to say because there's so many good ones, really. Anyway, Tim's here, and he's going to be speaking with us, if you haven't already read it, on Grassland Birds. Keep in mind, Grassland Birds are in big trouble, and I'm sure he's going to mention that. The last study showed the last 50 years, for example, and I'm walking on his tongue. 53% decrease in grassland birds. This is a whopping hit, and bluebirds are one of them, but they have organizations. The other 30 species are enjoying. It's different. Tim, I'm sorry.
Thanks so much, Steve. Right there.
Someone left their glasses in the ladies' restroom. If you'd like to claim them so you can see the presentation.
All right, thank you so much for having me. This is my first time with the Bluebird folks, so I'm excited to be here, and thank you for choosing Horicon Marsh, which is one of my favorite places to come, so I got a double benefit today. Also, I do have this, as Paul mentioned, this van full of Bluebird boxes, so if you're interested in taking those out of my van, that would be awesome. Anyway, my name is Tim Hansel, and I'll just say a little bit about myself before we get into things. I have a PhD in philosophy, which, as you know, makes a lot of money. And I taught at Edgewood College for 16 years before they decided that they didn't really need a philosophy department anymore. So in 2018, I was lucky enough to take a Wisconsin Master Naturalist course with an organization called the Prairie Enthusiasts. So yes, Judy, I am an official prairie enthusiast. And what they kind of taught me is that prairies are great, and I literally did become quite a prairie enthusiast, and started volunteering with the Prairie Enthusiasts in 2018, and I became the Empire Sauk chapter, which is basically the Dane County area. I became their education coordinator in 2019, and eventually left Edgewood College and then hooked up with the Pheasant Branch Conservancy, the Friends of Pheasant Branch Conservancy, and now I'm the education coordinator for them as well. So I'm here kind of representing Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Master Naturalist Organization, so I continue doing work with them. I'm an instructor for their trainings, so if you have the chance to take a Wisconsin Master Naturalist course, you definitely should. But I'm also here representing the Prairie Enthusiasts and the Friends of Pheasant Branch Conservancy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a Prairie Enthusiasts prairie and a Pheasant Branch prairie. So that's kind of what's going to happen today. But in general, we're going to be talking about grassland birds. And just to start off with, does anybody know who that is? That's a shorty. So this is one of my favorite grassland birds, are the short-eared owls. This guy I found in early January of this year. This is just south of Blue Mounds on Highway F, hanging out in somebody's cornfield looking for vole. So we'll talk more about him later. But there's just 4 parts to my talk here. So we're gonna start just kind of talking about who the grassland birds are. And you might think to yourself, well, an eastern bluebird is a grassland bird, and in one sense, yes, but in another sense, no. So in the sense that I'll be talking about, we will not be including the eastern bluebird in this conversation, but I'll just assume you guys have that covered anyway, so we'll move on to the other stuff. And then, as Steve mentioned, we will get to the bad news stuff, that yes, indeed, since 1970, we've seen a decrease in the grassland bird population in North America by about 53%. which in terms of habitats is one of the biggest loss of numbers. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is and how our management practices might be able to turn the tide here a little bit. And I'm by nature sort of an optimistic guy, but vibes aside, I think we have some good data to think that it can be done. And as you guys know, with a little bit of effort, we can make habitat for birds that leads to success, right? So we'll get to that. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about two prairies. We're going to talk about the Mounds View Grassland, which is a 830 acre prairie south of Blue Mounds. Has anybody ever been to Mounds View Grassland? All right, so you guys know, it's great. And it's owned and managed by the prairie enthusiasts and has lots of grassland birds, and it's basically just been a success story since the beginning. But then sort of more interestingly, I want to talk about Pheasant Branch Conservancy, which in 2019 made a purchase of a farm, which more than doubled their prairie acreage after they planted it to prairie. And we're going to talk about how that purchase and how that planting actually ended up being perfect for the return of some of the most interesting grassland birds that we're going to sort of talk about. So that'll be the very end of the talk here, where I end with some good news, right? So this isn't a doomer talk. We have a little bit of bad news, but we end with some good news. And then hopefully I'll be done in time that we can actually chat. So I tried to keep this kind of short so we can have plenty of time for questions and talking afterwards. So we'll see how that goes, because I do tend to ramble. Anyway, grassland birds. Who's that? Not Savannah. Grasshopper sparrow. That's a grasshopper sparrow. And he is sitting, I know you can't really sort of see it, but he is sitting on a prairie enthusiast side. Okay, so who are the grassland birds, and why isn't the eastern bluebird, why doesn't he count? What we're talking about here are grassland obligate birds. So grassland obligates are the ones who need a large portion of sort of grassland for their survival. And so oftentimes what we kind of focus on is the breeding situation for grassland birds. And grassland obligates tend to nest in the grass. So, do bluebirds nest in the grass? No. But they are in the grassland, right? So bluebirds like the open area, that's great for them. So they are, in one sense, a grassland bird because they're there, but in another sense, they're not a grassland bird because they don't need it, right? They don't need a grassy area to make a nest. So I got that little area there, so just that second bullet point, that other birds can be in the grasslands, but they don't count because they don't need them. And then importantly, so this gets to this question about managing for these sort of species. So as we heard from Judy, she talked a lot about how insects require certain kinds of plants, right? That in many cases, insects can be sort of specialists, right? So if you want to have monarchs in your land or in your yard, what do you need? Milkweed, right? And nothing else is going to work, right? You can't bring out something that's kind of like milkweed. I had my daughters like to hatch monarchs, and we were like, oh, well, they need some to eat, so go get some milkweed. And one of my daughter's friends was like, well, we'll just give them lemongrass. I was like, no, that's not going to work. So insects are like that, right? Insects tend to sort of specialize. It's going to matter for your prairie, right, your backyard prairie, that you have native plants, right? That's 70% number, right? You can have some non-natives, but if you really want to sort of manage for invertebrates, it's going to matter what your plants are. But for birds, that's not the case, right? That's one of the nice things, is that you can have kind of a crappy prairie, right? You can have a hayfield, you can have a pasture, you can have an alfalfa field, you can have just kind of whatever, as long as it's grassland. Because grassland birds especially respond to structure of the grasses and forbs, and not the type, not the species. And what they do care is, like, some birds, and we'll talk about this, like it higher or lower, right? So some like it really scrubby or almost bare, some like really high or duffy grass. But again, it doesn't really matter sort of what kind. And then the other sort of important feature is the acreage. So it's really important if you're gonna attract or have habitat for a grassland obligate, is to have enough acres, right? You can have the most pristine prairie in the whole wide world, but if it's not big enough, it's just not going to work, right? It's going to be too heavily predated, right? It's just too much. So let's talk about one of the most famous grassland birds most common is the eastern meadowlark, right? It's just like everything, eats meadowlark eggs, right? Raccoons and snakes and hawks, and just everybody's just in a line to eat these guys. And so if there's a predator corridor, it's just not going to work, right? So you need that sort of acreage. And I'm in the Madison area, so Pheasant Branch Conservancy is in Middleton. The Mounds View Grassland is south of Blue Mound. You guys know the UW Arboretum, right? I mean, they have really nice prairies, right? There's the Green Prairie south of the Beltline, which is 47 whole acres of really great prairie and lots of biodiversity and a lot of different plants. And I'm sure the bees are doing great there, right? Because they have everything that you need, but you don't have meadowlark. Right? You don't have these obligates who need at least, well, as we're going to talk about, at least a couple hundred acres to really be able to kind of survive and thrive. So, again, management speaking, we need, the structure is what sort of matters, and the more the better, right? So you need this for the acreage. So unfortunately, I can't give a talk and be like, this is something you can do in your backyard, right? Unless your backyard is, 250 acres, it's not going to work. So sorry about that. All right, so let's talk about some of the birds. So eastern I gave the answer. I should have left it off so you guys could guess it. But y'all know the eastern meadowlark, right? One of the most striking birds in my experience. This guy was yelling. This is a Mounds View Grassland bird who's just yelling on a fence post right over the prairie. Meadowlarks like fence posts, but they don't need them, right? You'll see them on top of trees and just in making themselves visible with that beautiful yellow breast with the black V. But if there's no fence post, if there's no trees, they'll just find a sturdy forb to hang out on and scream and yell like they do. And they have this just beautiful sound, right? Very kind of haunting. And but they are an obligate, right? They nest in the grass. And as I mentioned, if there's a predator corridor, it'll find it. So, like I said, raccoons, snakes, pretty much anything will eat a meadowlark and its its eggs. They don't have to travel very far. We're going to talk a little bit about migration. So, question.
Do they recognize that there's not enough space and move on?
Do they recognize that there's not enough space? I think they do, or either that or they just fail. Like if they try to make a nest, they don't succeed, and the ones that do, just a natural selection kind of thing. But going back to the Arboretum, you'll have them kind of move through during migration, but they don't stay, right? You don't hear reports of them actually sort of nesting. So that's, I don't know sort of specifically how they make that determination or if they make that determination, but you don't find them in the Arboretum. You do find them at Pheasant Branch now, and you do find them at Mounds View. Like I said, and I was talking about migration, so they don't have to migrate sort of very far. They're not, they're not one of the far migrants. But we'll get into somebody who does migrate, which is the dick thistle, which apparently people say it's onomatopoetic, is what how they call. So it's dick thistle, dick thistle. I don't hear it, but other people do. But this, in my opinion, is just one of the most beautiful birds out there. Similar to the meadowlark, it has this yellow breast with the black neck, and these just beautiful rufous wings, and this striking eyebrow and a heavy beak. And this guy took this picture at Pheasant Branch last year in June, where there were plenty of dick thistles in a time where nobody, previous to this, nobody has any recollection of seeing dick thistle at Pheasant Branch. So it's, again, I'm getting into the good news pretty quickly, but it's pretty nice. But anyway, these guys, they come up from South America, right? You find them a lot in Venezuela, where in the winter they will form into flocks of over 1 million birds, and it can be kind of a pain in the butt to farmers there. So one of the issues with their numbers declining might have to do with their classification as a pest. So super pretty, but also will eat the crap out of your farm field if you get 1 million of them in your backyard. Another one of my favorites, also a big migrant, comes up from Argentina, I think, and Paraguay. Yes, Paraguay and Argentina, and so that's more than I can do. And this is the bobolink, and the bobolink is just an awesome little bird, little black bird, kind of like a red-winged blackbird in their defense of their sort of territory. They'll come and sort of helicopter around you and make a lot of R2-D2-like sounds. And the males get this really cool blonde patch in the back. So the females, again, kind of like the red-winged blackbirds, look, just like big sparrows. But the males have this very cool coloring. And again, this guy was in the Mounds View Grassland. So this is, I think, 2019, where I saw this guy right outside the barn at Short Thompson Prairie. All right, talking about structure, right? So the birds that we just talked about, when it comes to sort of grassland, they're okay with just kind of somewhere in the middle, right? They don't really like things being super sparse. They don't like things being really dense or heavy. Hansel sparrows like things dense and heavy. And Hansel sparrows are a state-threatened species. So does anybody know much about a Hansel sparrow? Does anybody know what it sounds like? Pat, you know what it sounds like, don't you? Gail? Yep. Wait, is somebody playing it? Paul, did you play it? Yeah, it's a little slick. And but they love the heavy duff, right? So if you didn't burn your prairie, or somebody's playing it. If you didn't burn your prairie last year and you just left the duff behind, and you have like all kinds of big blue stem or other sort of tall things like compass plant, I'm hearing it all the time. So you rarely see these little guys because they're in the duff and they're sort of well protected, and they just make this little slick. So these guys are one of the guys that we're super on the lookout for, right? If your prairie can sort of harbor a Hansel sparrow, then you're sort of doing something right. And Hansel sparrow is something that you will see at Mounds View Grassland, and it's something that we're looking for at Pheasant Branch, right? We've had like one report of a Hansel sparrow. Gail, you know about this, right? And we don't think it was nesting.
I've looked over
So it may have been.
Some people have reported.
So yeah, so maybe, yeah, but again, you need that heavy duff. You know, they respond to sort of the taller, higher structure. So they're a really cool little sparrow. Another really cool little sparrow is the Savannah sparrow, and this is one, and I'll mention this in the good news part, where at Pheasant Branch, we've seen this huge resurgence of Savannah sparrow, that we went from seeing sort of very few to seeing them all over the place, and in particular in this new planting, where things have just been planted, you know, just a couple years ago, and they're just all over the place. And there is the Savannah sparrow song. Sort of a three-part song. It starts with those little introductory notes, the and then a little trill, a little high trill, and then it ends with a low trill. Hear that? So the high trill, low trill. So high trill, low trill. All right, let's see. I was all like, oh, should we do the songs? And we can. All right, well, all right, sound people. So going the other direction with a state-threatened species is the upland sandpiper. So the upland sandpiper is the other direction in that it likes low stuff. It doesn't like the high stuff. Here's a picture of one in a cornfield outside of Blue Mounds. So I didn't actually see it in the prairie, but I saw it in a cornfield across the street. But it was such a good shot that I decided to take its picture anyway. See, it's like we're there, right? This is great. So transport yourself to Moundsview Grassland. So here we are, the upland sandpiper, another great bird, kind of wonky in the sense that it's a shore bird without a shore. So how did that happen? I don't know, but we're glad to have it. And again, we have them at Mounds View, but we have yet to have a report at Pheasant Branch. So you know, we'll see if how things go. And then finally, I just gotta say, short-eared owl. So these short-eared owls will occur in Wisconsin, but we don't get a lot of breeding in Wisconsin. We get some breeding in Wisconsin. During the breeding season, these guys are active all year round, but in the winter, they will come down, and we're hearing the little mews. So they just kind of yell. But in the winter, they'll come down, and then they're not as active in terms because they're not feeding young or doing anything like that. So if you want to see them in the winter, you got to wait like right at sunset or sunrise. They're right there. That they'll fly around for a little bit and you get to see them. So this, as I mentioned, this guy I think was just north of Pheasant Branch. There's a marsh, the Wanakee Marsh, that was really active for a while. So I saw this guy, and I think it was Super Bowl Sunday of 2021. So instead of watching the Super Bowl, I was taking pictures of owls. So, and again, you need lots of acreage, right? You're not going to see these guys at the Arboretum. And I should mention though, is, you know, when we say acreage, we're talking about cornfields and hayfields, and, you know, if you have your land in CRP, that's great, right? All these sorts of things are areas where if you get enough acres, right, if it's unfragmented enough, you'll start to see these guys. So in terms of management, it's kind of low key for us, right? We don't have to do anything sort of special except get the land, maybe remove some, you know, fragmentation, things like that, and you know, they will come. Okay, bad news, right? So this isn't gonna surprise a whole lot of people, right? This is the dreaded 2019 Science article where since 1970 we've lost 2.9 billion birds, which is, that's not good. And the grassland birds make up a big chunk of that, right, 53%. Shorebirds, not doing too great. Boreal forest, western forest, Arctic tundra, eastern forest, right? Everybody's on the decline, and that's pretty sad. Except everyone's not on the decline, right? Oh, sorry. I should just mention the grassland here real quick. Pretty scary numbers, right? Big loss. 73% of eastern meadowlarks lost since 1970. Okay, back to my other thing. It's not the decline for everybody. Oh, something out of order. I'll go back. So, in all these lines where things are going down, right, that's where bird numbers are going down. But we have lines going up. So who's going up? Waterfowl. Raptors. Why are they going up? Money. Who keeps the waterfowl alive? Ducks Unlimited. Why? Because I want to shoot them. But you gotta have birds if you want to shoot them, right? So, but it just takes a will, right? It's just you just gotta do it. And at least that's my take, right? You just gotta do it, and you'll have the birds. Yeah, Paul.
There's a statistic. If anybody has facts on this, please see me afterwards. I understand Ducks Unlimited, when they fund something, will pay for 7 acres of wetland for every acre of wetland.
Yeah.
That is good for grassland birds too.
Yep. Yeah. So we'll take that hunting money. You can hunt on prairie enthusiast land. We just ask that you cool it with the dogs a little bit. But yeah, question.
When you talk about fragmentation, what do you mean? I'm from a really rural area where a lot of farmers have left. And so we have grassland we planted, but then there's farmers' fields or pasture lands across the fence or across a road. What is fragmentation?
So what constitutes fragmentation? So let me back up a little bit because I got my things out of order here. So some of the things that can contribute to the loss of these sort of grassland birds is one of them is fragmentation, and you could put that in breeding habit fragmentation and also agricultural practices. It's just that where you have a boundary from your grass, so if you look out, across the way here, there's, once you get past these trees, you don't see a lot of fragmentation, right? There aren't lots of boundaries, but oftentimes we're just talking about a tree line. If you have a tree line going through your prairie, that is a corridor for predators, right? That they will sort of come in. It's like a highway for them. So the more that you fragment your prairie, the more that basically just diminishes the size of the prairie, right? If you cut your 200 acre prairie in half with a tree line, then you have two 100 acre prairies instead of a 200 acre prairie. And that'll be enough. I mean, that's why some, large grass, or some small grasslands can do okay if they're right next door to a hayfield, right? So if it isn't fragmented, right, that will contribute to the success of the prairie. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Even just a path going through a prairie would fragment, right?
Yes, that is the thinking. Is that the concern is like a bike trail, for instance, could fragment the prairie, and if that happens, then that's sort of bad news. In fact, one of the management concerns that we have for Pheasant Branch is, well, we have this new prairie. Where are we going to put this bike trail? Can we make it just go through the prairie, or should it go on the outside? And the thinking is it should go on the outside. But anyway, lots of things to sort of think about here: breeding habitat laws, agricultural practices. So one of the things about grassland birds is they tend to nest in the grass, including hayfields, in June. And it used to be the case that most of the hayfields would be harvested or mowed in like July, right, or a little bit sort of later in the summer. But with different management practices, we're seeing that date move up earlier and earlier, so they can get a couple of harvests, and so we get more mowing in prime sort of breeding season, right? That could be an issue. Migration disruption, right? There's a lot to talk about how things might be disrupting migration. The wintering ground issues. One thing I mentioned is Venezuela with the dick thistle is it's being treated as a pest, and people are poisoning all these dick thistle to try to keep their sorghum fields going. I think it's sorghum and rice that dick thistle really like. And then of course issues with sort of climate change. But a lot of this stuff is something as a nonprofit organization we can't fix, right? We can't fix their winter breeding ground stuff, right? But what we can do is provide habitat, and hopefully unfragmented sort of habitat. Okay, so 2 prairies. Mounds View Grassland. What you need to know is that it's awesome, you should go there. It is 5 miles south of Blue Mountain, Wisconsin. It's on Highway F, and it's 830 acres, and it's basically 4 prairies that over the years the prairie enthusiasts have been just sort of managing and buying. And so the most recent acquisition is the Hanley Farm Prairie, which was 160 acres. It cost us $3 million, but we bought it, and it's awesome. And it's super unfragmented. I know you can't really tell from this picture, but very few trees on this land. There's cornfield, corn soybean field, but that's fine for birds. There's a lot of cool season grasses. There's CRP land. A lot of the farmers around, they have pasture. It's a lot of unfragmented land. And for the 830 acres that we have, we would count 85% of it as grassland, right? We have some oak savanna and some degraded oak savanna. It's surrounded by cropland. The restoration that the prairie enthusiasts engaged in started in 2000, so we got 24 years of working this, planting things to prairie, and managing mostly with burns now. We don't do a lot of mowing. We'll get to the mowing here in a second, but long story short is don't mow in June if you can, right? That's the please, please, please kind of question. But we do have to, we remove shrubs, right? We try to sort of eliminate those fragmentation corridors, right? With those predator corridors. But we don't just manage for grassland birds, right? The one thing that we have at Mounds View Grassland are Bell's vireo. And Bell's vireo are also a state threatened species, and we have a pretty good population there. So if you haven't seen Bell's vireo, go over here, they're all over the place. So we have to maintain some shrub, or at least we've decided to maintain some shrub, right? We have various different sort of conservation goals. It's not just for grassland birds. We want to have some habitat for the Bell's vireo, so we don't get rid of everything, right? There's a balance between the different competing interests of the different sort of species and animals. But of course, we do a lot of tree removal to remove fragmentation and predator corridors. So in the new Hanley acquisition, we had this big line of spruce. Why do you have a whole bunch of spruce on your farm? I'm not sure, but there were some long-eared owls there, so we got rid of most, but not all, of that spruce line because, again, just fragments the land. But what kind of birds do we have at Mounds View? We got all of them, right? We have upland sandpiper. Everything that was on this list was there since I got there. I think they were most except for I think the Hansel and the Bell's vireo were there at the time of acquisition. So it was basically just kind of, we just got to keep the maintenance, right? We don't do a lot of mowing. It is a prairie though. It's a fire-dependent ecosystem. So we burn very regularly. The whole prairie gets burned on a 3-year cycle. So We do as Judy mentioned, we do, refugia burns. We have to make sure that, especially because we have a lot of regal fritillaries there as well, so invertebrates, so we don't burn the whole thing all at once. We have to do little chunks and leave refugia, but it has to be disturbed, right? If you leave it alone, it'll succeed into a forest, right? And you won't have a grassland anymore, right? So it has to be disrupted. You're gonna have to kill some stuff, and otherwise, you don't have that particular biotic community. So let's get to the interesting story. I don't want to diminish Mount View Grassland, but this is the success story, right? So Pheasant Branch Conservancy, it's in the middle of Middleton. It is currently surrounded by development, and will continue to be surrounded by development. I think right now the only thing that is undeveloped is due north of the Conservancy. Everything else is subdivisions and residential housing. But here you have this big chunk of Conservancy in the middle of, well, not the middle, but anyway, in a fairly sort of urban sort of situation. The Conservancy itself is 360 total acres, and a lot of that is wooded or marsh, not prairie. The actual sort of prairie portion is about 260 acres, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on how you sort of define things. And 160 of those acres was acquired in 2019. So just a few years ago, right? And started being planted to prairie, so it was a farm. But they decided, okay, we're gonna plant this to a sort of a platinum prairie. And they started in 2020 and they ended this year, right? So they planted sort of different sections, and the last section was sort of this year. And so here's a picture of it, right? This is the very top of the Conservancy. You can go there now. There's one tree in this area. It's one bur oak, and the rest of it is prairie. It's beautiful, and you can see sort of the planting schedule here. Started in 2020, ended in 2024. And oops, I didn't want to skip ahead too much. And there have been some sort of issues, like I mentioned, that when they're planting the prairie, they're like, oh man, we have this sort of Canada thistle. How are we gonna handle that? Okay, we'll handle that with mowing. When are you gonna mow? Okay, we're gonna mow in June. And that was not the best, but it's tough for a friends group to kind of do this because we don't make all the management decisions. This is managed by Dane County Parks. And so whomever is in charge of that was like, well, this is when we're gonna mow, and if that's the decision, that's when they're gonna mow. But they did leave refugia, they didn't mow sort of the whole thing. So, again, a balance of interests. And it's been going on, and the good news is we got Grassland Birds now. In 2019, Wisconsin Naturalist Capstone Project, headed by Janet Kane. Was it Janet? Gail, was Janet the main person? Deb Kersey, Janet Kane, and you were one of the monitors as well. They're like, well, let's monitor this sort of prairie. I mean, one of the issues wasn't necessarily the new acquisition, but there's just like, well, what's the deal with Grassland Birds? There's a lot of dogs at this park. There used to be meadowlark. Why aren't there meadowlarks sort of anymore? And they started doing this monitoring project that sort of coincided with the acquisition of this prairie and the planting of the prairie parcels, and they started getting this data. And these are, at the outset, these are the birds that they were sort of monitoring for. They've since added bobolink to this sort of list. And some of the numbers are a little, not a whole lot of going on, right? So for some odd reason, we saw 6 grasshopper sparrow in 2020, but none since. And that one Hansel sparrow report in 2020, but none since. But look at the Savannah sparrow, right? Savannah sparrow, like 0 in 2020, 46 in 2022. The dick thistle is just this huge eruption of dick thistle, from 1 in 2020 to 23, or 35, excuse me, why did I say 23? In 2022, meadowlark went from 12, but then down to 7, but back to 31. And then, as I should mention, bobolinks have kind of followed the dick thistles, right? In terms of just nobody ever reporting them at Pheasant Branch before, to them being present and breeding and nesting. And the cool thing about bobolinks is they're polygamous, right? So you have the one male who kind of does the rounds of checking out all his nests, and he's very territorial. But they're all there, right? And this data ends in 2022. I don't have the updated data, but it's just been amazing, right? That with this one addition, right, this 160 acres, we went to like never seeing them ever, right? Or seeing them in the past when things were less developed around, to having them sort of back, really tells you something, right? That it's not impossible, right, to sort of manage for these birds, although it does require land. So the acquisition, and so the people who know, right, don't tell the answer, but the acquisition from Dane County Parks, it cost the prairie enthusiasts $3 million to buy 160 acres. In Middleton, any guess on how much this 160 acres cost? $10 million. Yeah, because who are you competing with?
Developers.
The developers, right? And the developers are everywhere else, right? But so this will be interesting to see what happens as the rest of that land gets developed, right? As it becomes sort of a central park of Middleton, right? And surrounded by a residential area. Will those birds stay, right? Will we still have them if that northern corridor is shut off? And I don't know the answer, right? I mean, it'll maybe, we just don't know. But in the meantime, if you have $10 million extra, maybe you just buy that farm to the north. But that dairy farm to the north might be worth more. I think that may be true. So please check out, if you're interested in this stuff, check out the prairieenthusiast.org. That's Blue Mounds, or pheasantbranch.org. That's the Friends group website. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Well, since we're on the subjects, I wanted to ask this, like with that farm to the north.
Yeah.
Do you begin having conversations with farmers like early, or do you just wait till they are ready to sell?
We
I'm
begin
often
early.
wondering how it worked.
Yeah, we always, especially with the prairie enthusiasts who are surrounded by farmers, we're always talking to them about their management practices. Like if they're putting up sometimes they want to build a windbreak, right? And they want those spruce lines, and we say, well, can we talk about this? Can we sort of explain ourselves? And it's tough sometimes because it gets kind of political, things are kind of sort of polarized. So sometimes we get called the prairie fairies, and sometimes our kiosks get vandalized and things like that. So we try to have, these cordial, sort of thoughtful relationships with the landowners around us, and try to sort of work things out. And eventually those things do kind of turn into, well, hey, maybe I'm not going to sell, maybe I'm going to sort of donate, or maybe we're going to get into conversations about like a conservation easement, or something like that. So we're always in conversation with those people.
And probably sometimes the best selling point is having them watch you do your work and
Yes.
develop the land around them. Because
Yes.
they'll see the change.
Yes, that is one of the selling points, is that they can kind of see, and if we can get them on the land, right, and just to kind of see not just the birds, but all the different forms, and just how special a place it is. I think just being in the prairie, especially in the middle of the summer, or if you're doing seed collection in the fall, it's just an amazing experience. So yeah, Pat.
In my area, city parks and some of the county parks seem to tend to cut some of the prairie or grassland areas in end of June, early July, and I think it might be because of poison parsnips and Canadian thistle that they're trying to control. although I don't seem to think that works well, but is that what they're doing when they cut in the middle of the summer?
Yes. So as Pat was asking, is like, well, why are they cutting in June and July? It's weed management, and it's primarily I think primarily for Canada thistle. I think they don't want to mow parsnip.
They mow parsnip and they try to spray Canada thistle.
Oh, is that right? Okay. I'll take your word for it. But there is mowing going on at that time, and it's typically for weed control. And it's tough, right? Because that's the best time. You want to get those weeds before they go to seed, right? And but that tends to be a prime time for the birds.
Well, I've used guerrilla gardening in my local city park to plant milkweeds, and I got a really good crop going, but they cut it right when it's half grown. So now I start to put them around the base of trees that they can't get to. And it's working. I'm succeeding.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, that's the way management works, right? I mean, you have these competing management goals, and you want, as Leopold would say, it's what's good for the community, the biotic community, as opposed to sort of the individuals within that community. So we tend to that tends to be kind of the way we look at things with management, is how to keep the system going, as opposed to tailoring things to specific sort of species or individuals. Maybe sort of one or two quick ones, and then I should probably let you go to lunch.
Do you classify pheasant and like prairie chicken or something like that as a grassland?
Yes, a pheasant is a grassland obligate. A prairie chicken is grassland obligate. Prairie chicken needs like 10,000 acres though, so we're not gonna. And then the pheasant is, I don't know a whole lot about the pheasant given the pheasant branch, but it's not native, yeah, and it's a game fowl, so.
But they have political support.
They do have political support, yes.
Pheasants forever.
Yes, and that's why at Mounds View, you have to allow hunting, right? We have to allow pheasant hunting because we got a whole bunch of money by allowing that to happen. Okay, I'll tell you what, it's lunchtime for y'all, so if you have other questions, I'm going to be around and we can chat, and I can talk forever about this stuff, as you've seen. But thanks so much for having me, and